Welcome to PucktalkCS, here to review the season end for the New York Rangers as they were eliminated in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Final. No conversation about the summer, the draft, what have you, strictly about the season and how it wrapped up. Steve-O, not too happy with that.
That was my reaction right there. I was literally expressionless that entire game. So listen, it's sad. It's depressing. It's the same thing year after year after year for the last 3 years. But we got to do it, Chives. Let's talk some puck. Oh, there's only a few things that are staples, and let's talk some puck and luck of the puck are the only things that are going to be consistent on today's epi. So let's jump in, Chives. Give me your raw reaction, your first thought after that disaster class of Game 5 and 6.
Yeah, so we didn't get to talk about Game 5. I think the sad thing about the way this season ended after that, we talked after the Wenberg OT goal, was that everything in the regular season that was a concern, it seemed to have vanished because winning cures all. That's the reality. When you win, those things don't matter. And those bad habits, everything rose back to the surface. And you talk about Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, and Adam Fox as individuals. They didn't have the best regular season play amid, Fox with an injury that seemed to, come back up. If it's not something major, I think that's a concern. But power play, the penalty kill was good all year. The lineup, that's something that we've talked about since 2022, whether it was Gallant, Laviolette, all those things came to fruition. I also wasn't shocked by the loss in Game 6 because I don't think they performed well in Game 4, 5, or 6 to warrant, the belief from the fans, from, the reporters. It seemed there wasn't a lot of statistics that they were throwing out there that were really getting behind the Rangers and how they could win the games. So, Steve, I need to know, outside of the, raw, straight up facial expression, I think we agree on most terms, right? In terms of how this played out. But I also don't think as outlandish as what I've seen on the internet as well.
I agree with everything you just said, and I'll kind of play devil's advocate to some of those points, but me and you were very consistent after Game 2, after Game 3. We were saying that we defended this team, and we said, you know what? The media was trashing us. We played horrible in Game 2, and we still won. We played horrible in Game 3, and we won. We were lucky, and we found ways to win those games. But there's a point where luck runs out, and the luck ran out. You saw it in Game 4. Minus that, I really do think we played a great game in Game 4. Minus the Mika debacle, OT ending, put OT aside. I really do think, minus the last 5-ish minutes of the third, Game 4 was a really well played game by the Rangers. We jumped up, we jumped early, we had a fantastic first period. But me and you defended this team after Games 2 and Games 3, and it didn't pan out. Everything everybody was saying was basically correct. This team wasn't playing well. But at the same time, to defend some of these points, every single game, it was just one goal. It was either tied for majority of the game, or practically they had a stat on the broadcast in Game 6 that 80-something percent, I think it was like 87 or 88% of the series was basically a tie game, tied or a one goal lead for majority of the series. So you could make the point that one goal lead, this was very close. I mean, and we started the series off with not being able to generate shots. And I think that, or chances, well, yeah, and shots at certain points. We'd go 14 minutes without a Ranger shot or 18 minutes without a Ranger shot. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I think that flipped. I think in Game 5, we had a lot of chances, and nobody could find the back of the net. Nobody could find the back of the net. And just when you think the momentum switches, you could point to, I mean, we could jump in now to specific moments, but I'll just give you a few to highlight it. When the tide switching, they run into Igor. We're already on the power play. We're getting a 5-on-3 for a minute and 30 seconds. and Gustafson takes a roughing call and make it 5-on-4, and we couldn't generate anything. I mean, that we were up 1-0 at that point. We could have 5-on-3. I mean, you like to think you were getting a really good opportunity there, and there's just so many more opportunities that I could ramble off. I'm sure the listeners, if you're listening, you do not want to hear this because this makes my blood boil, and I know it does Chives too. I mean, I said this before. We got to go to a freaking the Rangers community as a whole. We got to go to a freaking. They should treat us to a rage room at MSG. Just put a big freaking rage room across the ice and let all the fans come in and freaking put pictures of Panarin up there and Zibanejad and let people just go to town after that.
Now, Steve-O, I concur. 1-goal games. And that comes down to scoring. And I know you can't outscore your problems, but eerily similar to the elimination games against Tampa. Now, I think the discourse is correct. And there's a very shared, the shared consensus out there is, in 22, it was they exceeded expectations. We were expecting a rebuild year. They go to the conference final against the back-to-back cup champion and go to 6 games. In game 6, they're tired. They have no legs. They played 2 game 7s. That felt good. That felt rewarding. They made it that far. Last season, stakes go up, right? When you play that great, everybody plays up to your level. They try and play to your level. In the regular season, they played the rivals and the Devils that they were locked into for probably 2 months before to play in the playoffs. They lose in game 7 after being shut out in game 5 and 7. And in game 3, that's where the tide turned. And that was the second instance where we didn't see them with the killer instinct. It happened against Tampa when they were up in game 3 and they lost 4 games in a row. But again, everyone felt good because no one expected them to be there. Now in 2023, with Tarasenko, the Kane moves, you expected them to be, again, gunning for the Stanley Cup, and they lose in round 1. And with that, change of coach, change of guard, and the same result from this core. Now that trend is becoming concerning because it's now no longer a trend to me, it's a pattern. 3 years of that. And with players that are locked into contracts, a lot coming up on the horizon, you look and you say, who are the standout players? And Steve-O, I know you and I agree. I would throw, obviously, Igor, Loff, Goodrow, Kreider, maybe not as much in the conference final. That would probably be it, unless I'm forgetting someone. But Steve-O, I know we've talked about Trocheck all year. How would you describe his performance up until, the very end?
He was the season MVP, and listen, he wasn't cooking in game 6, but it doesn't matter because he was cooking literally the past 20 games, and he was our season MVP. He was the catalyst. I could sit here and give you every single play, whether it's Lafreniere's game tying goal in the forget what game, but against the Hurricanes, whether it's Goodrow's winner in game 2 in the Eastern Conference Final. If it's Goodrow's shorthanded goal in game 3 in the Eastern Conference Final, every single one of those plays was created by Vinny T. And that's what we saw. We saw that literally in every single series. I think he had like 7 goals in the entire playoffs. He came to play. And not even that, but he was physical. I'll never forget the taunting to Aho in the second round. All season long. And I think the one thing that I want to stress about him, Chives, is he was consistent. He was reliable. He got the job done when we needed to, compared to Mika, where I think he kind of woke up a little bit in March and May and April a little bit. But let's go back to October, November, and December, and January, where he was quiet. And looking back at it, I think we all kind of forgot what happened in the beginning of the year. Mika had a terrible year. And I think those 2 weeks where he woke up, he was scoring goals. I think a lot of fans are like, we're back. And also, it's so hard to point out the negatives when the Rangers had such a brilliant year, winning the President's Trophy. I think the Rangers had a good year, good regular season, But I think this team wasn't at the point where we need a good regular season. The Columbus Blue Jackets come out and have a good season, and they come in within like 3 games of making the playoffs. That's a good season for them. Our
Mhm.
expectation was different, and I'm tired of hearing all these things. What's more demoralizing is the 94 references. I mean, the 7-0. I mean, all the references, and not even. But there was other things too, like the last time the Yankees captain got ejected was in 1994. Aaron Judge got ejected a couple weeks ago. All those comparisons, and I think to see that this team had nothing in the tank to end the season. You say it. If you're gonna die, end it and make it quick. This was a slow death. This is one that I think you could agree with me. I'm not like I'm not angry because you got the sense after game 5, ever since they scored that second goal in game 5, the stupid Forsling goal. Was it Forsling or was it Lundell? I don't know. I was there. I was so aggravated. Didn't matter. But you got the sense like, it's gonna be hard to win.
Steve-O teeing off now. Yeah, I hear you on all those fronts. I personally didn't mind. Like, I like the 94 references. I just think this is a different team. Uh, I want to start with a player that I thought was a little bit over criticized, and I know I'm going to take heat for that. I don't care. Jacob Trouba. To me, everyone is questioning a lot around number 8. I don't think he had a great playoff by any means. He was one of 2 defensemen that scored a goal for the New York Rangers. He and his partner, Keandre Miller, are the only 2 defensemen on the blue line that scored a goal for the New York Rangers by game 6 of a conference final. They were going, if they win 2 games and they're in the cup final, only 2 goals came from their blue line. He had one of them. And it was shorthanded, if you could believe that. I don't think 8 had a stellar playoff. I thought he was okay. I know the penalty minutes, some of the plays, yes. Now, the reason I say that, though, is because there's a lot of questioning about his leadership. I think the questioning of his leadership is off base. All of the players in the locker room chose Jacob Trouba as the captain. So the discourse that, they should remove him from that position, it's off base. It's just not happening. This core, it goes along with not only the locked in contracts, but I think the faith the organization has in the players that they've clearly shown by signing them to these deals. It's just not going to change. And I know a lot of people, and I think this isn't about Trouba, but let's move forward because there were a lot of underperformers. Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad, he's the underperformer of the year for me. I think there's a lot of conversation about radical moves, and I don't think those are on the horizon. They may be. I'm no clairvoyant. But Steve-O, let's start with as concise of a criticism as we could provide for some of those names. Let's start, because I think we disagree on Trouba, and that's okay. But I want to hear your opinions on, those 3 players that I think are taking the most heat.
Yeah. I listen. People are out there calling for Trouba to be cut from the team. Not only remove the C, get cut from the team. And I think we could both agree both of that is not going to happen. And I'm not doubting his work ethic. I'm not doubting his attitude or his character. But Trouba has not played good hockey in the playoffs. Now, I do think there were a few games, I think notably in the Carolina series, where Trouba was our only defender in some of those games. And if Trouba didn't make big plays, I think very easily we lose some of those games, like game 3 in Carolina. But again, he was not good in the Panther series. I think he really struggled at bringing at zone entries. Trouba was not well at. A lot of mental mistakes, and the penalties. The penalties again. He took more than, I don't know the specific number, but he took more than 10 penalties this postseason. I mean, you just can't do that, And I think he has an $8 million cap hit, Chives. I know your money with these numbers. I don't see anybody taking that much of a cap hit, and he's not going anywhere. A lot of these guys that we are going to be talking about, they're not going anywhere because last year I think we made majority of the big moves. Again, what franchise makes big moves 2 years in a row? And not only that, but pan out. You see a lot of franchises make big moves 2 years in a row, but those are franchises that don't know what the hell they're doing. Like the Carolina Panthers, they don't know what they're doing. They do shit like that. We're not in that boat, And guys like Panarin, Zibanejad, Trouba, that's the team's core. And the team's core, I said this to you before the episode. Jury is going to be evaluating this for sure. I don't think next year is going to change, but I think after next year's season, when contracts start to expire, you might see Jury moving on from some guys because we've seen the same situation from 2022 to 2023 to 2024. It just guys are not postseason players, and Trouba's not going anywhere. Zibanejad's not going anywhere. You had an interesting point about Zibanejad before we got going. I want to deep dive into that for in a second. But Panarin's not going anywhere. And Panarin, listen, he's my favorite player. I love Panarin. He was one of the best players in the regular season, but he's just a regular season player. I know last year we said, oh, we'll see. And this year he said, oh, we'll see. Now I'm telling you, and I think it's confirmed, there's no argument. Panarin is not a postseason player. The way he plays, that's not a recipe for success in the postseason. Yeah, it was a recipe for success against the Washington Capitals, but that was the Washington Capitals. They stunk. They had nobody, and they were just that overmatched. You saw it in Carolina. Carolina again. Carolina and Florida, very similar teams, and I really do think, yes, we were good, Chaz, but the reason the Rangers won in Carolina was because Freddie Anderson. I mean, he gave up 5 freebie goals. Florida didn't give us any freebie goals. So I know I said a lot there. I'll pitch it over to you. You could attack anything I just said, but let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah. So I evaluate players, I think, by their floor and by their ceiling. And this is why nothing surprised me last night, because to me, or the last few games, frankly, to me, the floor was what we saw from Panarin in the last 3 games. When Zibanejad was criticized for not tying up Bennett or showing the desperation with the empty netter at Game 5 at home, he's never initiated physicality. And I'm not saying he doesn't get involved when he needs to, but Mika Zibanejad is not taking 2 strides and blowing up Bennett along the boards. That's not Mika Zibanejad. The reason all those characteristics stuck out is because he was at his floor in production. And Mika Zibanejad's game has been on the power play one-timer position, 5-on-5. He plays well enough on both ends of the ice. He controls the center lane, and he has pretty good speed. Long strides, good speed. He can hang with the physicality. And I think when he's at his ceiling, he's one of the best goal-scoring centers in the NHL. When he's at his floor, he wins 5 of 11 faceoffs, gets shut down by Barkov in the same way he got shut down by Stamkos, in the same way he got shut down by Nico Hischier and the Devils centerman. He had 1 goal against the Devils last season in the postseason, and that was in Game 6, a game that he had a timely goal, but they won. They scored 6 goals in that game. And the playoff year before, he started not to score any goals against Tampa, and then they lost that series. So I don't think Zibanejad shocked me. What the issue is now he's under contract. He's been in New York for 8 years, and now you've committed 7 more years to him with no trade, no move, like with incentives on the contract. Now, I don't want to talk about the future, but I think if we're talking about this series and just like what that stands out as, and I think not playoff player is a very, like that's a label that we hear often. I think it's not this, what we're seeing is a recipe for success, and I really appreciate that Brian Boyle brought it up. Because we think about the Rangers of years past, and I want to talk about the depth too right now because that this is a key factor in it. Rick Nash missed the Game 5 double OT wide open net, right? And then that offseason, the Rangers, ironically, Brian Boyle brought the points up last night in the postgame about what teams will win, the teams with physical players, the teams that win in the trenches. And he said, the Rangers didn't do that. And that's true. They don't have that in their DNA. The Sam Bennett, the Reinhart, they all have that. Kachuk, they made that big move for him. We talked about it 2 years ago. Rick Nash misses that empty netter. Who walks in the offseason? Brian Boyle, Anton Strawman. 2 players that the Rangers could not afford to lose. Now we look to off seasons ago, it was Frank Vetrano and Andrew Kopp. They walked because Ryan Strome missed on an empty net. And then we signed Vincent Trocheck. And now he was one of the only players that performed well in the playoffs. Why? He's rugged. He can do both. He can score. He wins in the faceoffs. He matches up well. He plays with an edge. And sadly, Barclay Goodrow, who scored 6 goals and 8 points outside of being a number 1 penalty killer on this team, he's the player now in conversation to move because of the hefty contracts to the players that are on the power play. Adam Fox, Mika Zibanejad, Artemi, Panarin, 3 of arguably the worst performers for the players. It's sad because I think the depth players are also being criticized in Capo Caco, Philip Hedl, Barclay Goodrow. To a degree, Wenberg and Roslovic. I think Roslovic had it coming. Will Cooley. Those names popped up as if they were the players that were supposed to be scoring. The Rangers power play did not score. What were they? 2 for it was an unreal stat. Was not performing, right? Overall, the scoring in 1-goal games was not there. And I think that comes down to the big players. And I know that's trite, but it was all year we talked about it. And that's what it came down to. So, Steve, in terms of those depth guys, what did you feel about overall their performances in the series?
I thought you railed it off pretty good. The performancing was amazing. And I think when it came down to it, Goodrow stepped up. All these guys stepped up. But the Rangers' depth stepped up in Game 2 in the Eastern Conference Final. It stepped up in Game 3. But the problem was Loff. You could put him there as a depth guy. I know he's been one of our best players. But I mean, when you say core, I'm thinking Trocheck, Panarin, Fox, Mika, Kreider. Like that's what you think.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't sustainable for this team. And I 100% agree. If you told me before the Eastern Conference or in the playoffs in general, Barclay Goodrow is going to have 6 goals, I'm saying we're in the cup. Yeah, let's go. That's not the case because nobody showed up. Panarin, nothing. And that one bullshit goal with 20 seconds at the end, that's so Rangers. That doesn't count. Mika did not show up. Kreider, minus that one shorthanded goal, did not show up. A lot of guys up and down the lineup. And the thing is, and I hate to say it because we defended it, but we defended our point and we went up against this media narrative that was being pushed. And we were wrong. We will have to admit it, we were wrong. The depth scoring, it wasn't sustainable because we stole games. Looking back at it, I changed my point. We stole games in games 2 and 3 because of the depth. And it didn't. Relying on your depth to win games, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And you said that to me after Game 5, and you were right because there was at no point in the series, Chives, did I think. And again, I was the fan in me. It was the fact that we led the league in comeback wins. Our play in the third period was fantastic all year long. And there was nothing you could point to and say, "Whoa, this looks good. I feel good. We're gonna win." And that wasn't the case. And you want to break it down, Chives? I agree with you. I'm not surprised about Mika Zibanejad. I'll throw a stat at you. Mika Zibanejad, again, like I said earlier in the epi, he had a horrible year. And I really do think all eyes will be on him next year because Mika Zibanejad had 8 goals this regular season on 5-on-5. 8 goals in the entire regular season on 5-on-5. And these are some of the stats that people, again, when you have success, it gets overlooked. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised. And
Now I'll say this though, Steve-O. I love stats, and you know that I'm a history guy. I'm a stats guy. I even love advanced stats. I've gotten to know Mike Kelly. I love what they're doing and what they're pushing the new frontier with that, like Megan Chaka. But I also think you can't create, like, people create narratives out of stats. And actually, Steve Alquette responded to me on Twitter one time, and he agreed. Like, you can't create narratives you can't look at stats and then create a narrative. But we knew Mika's scoring was down, so the 8 5v5 goals in the regular season gives context to why. To me, stats should provide an answer or support a claim, and you use that perfectly to me and where I like to use statistics. Like, that's the perfect example of why a stat like that is alarming, because he's your 1C, and he's not playing to the par of other number 1 centers in the NHL.
And that's the problem. I agree. And he's being paid like a 1C. And that's the problem. Is he a Barkov? I think that's established. No. Is he, at this point, you can talk. Is he, you can compare him to Jack Hughes? I think the answer to that is also no. So those are the type of questions. I know this is not an off-season preview. This is raw thoughts. But when I say evaluation, these are the things that are going to be evaluated moving forward. And uh, I'm not sure if there was something there behind Mika. Again, I don't know if there was a lingering injury that he was dealing with and was playing through the season. Because again, this year was just really bad for him. Yeah, I'm not surprised if it comes out that he has a whatever, or has been playing with or whatever. So I don't know. And Adam Fox is another one too. I mean, you mentioned it before the episode started. I'm not surprised if he comes out and he's got something that needs a procedure for tweaking, to fix. Because again, he was another one that when you compare his play in the postseason 2022 to his play in the postseason this year, it's a huge, huge difference. And again,
Now, I'll say this though, Steve.
yeah, go ahead.
I agree, but I think Fox, out of all of the names you mentioned, might get the biggest pass because we know that he's capable of more. Like, I think Zibanejad and Panarin, and even Trouba in some degrees. I also think Trouba had a really good 22 postseason as well. And I don't think he was as bad as some have made him out to be. I think New York is definitely looking for a scapegoat in some respects. With that, I think Adam Fox, out of all those core players, though, outside Chris Kreider is his own guy. I think he shows up, right? He's a 16-game player. Wasn't great in the conference final, but I still think out of those guys, he's a guy that shows up. I thought Adam Fox, though, is right in the there in the respect that he put up 30 points or 25 points in the 22 postseason. I don't think he played bad defensively this year, but I think Adam Fox, out of all those guys, has, and I think even fans know, he didn't perform great, but we know something's up. We know something's going to come out. I do think he gets a little more of a pass, and I'm not saying that if he's our, Brian Leachian type of number 1 defender, that Norris winner, that's an excuse, but I do think that something's up. So I do feel like there is the sense that there's a little more of a pass with him.
I agree with that, but the problem is when the rest of your defense doesn't show up and is not performing well, everybody gets grouped into the same category. And I think, apart from the defense, a lot of our wingers in the defensive zone also didn't help out on defense, and I think that was
Yeah.
the one true thing that we struggled with, and that was clearing the puck out of the zone and winning those battles against the boards to maintain puck possession, and that was the one thing we struggled with the entirety of this Eastern Conference Finals against Florida. And if you want to sum it up right there, I think those are your two main points. And I think you got to tip your hat to Florida. That's their style of play. And it was clearly the kryptonite piece to the way we played, and we couldn't figure it out all season long. I think you could sit here and ramble through 100 million other things. We could go player by player, but I think as an entire team, we'll get to Igor in a second. We just couldn't figure out those two things. What do you think?
But Steve-O, here's the thing too. I think the criticism of Panarin isn't as much about it's about the player. I don't think it's about the player as much as when you get to the Eastern Conference Final and the Stanley Cup Final, the teams that make it there play the style that shuts him down and nullifies him. And I think the concern with many fans is the ambiguity of what that means for this team, because he's under contract for 2 more years. He was the biggest free agent signing in NHL history. He is your first 100-point scorer since Jaromir Jagr in over a decade. I think the conversation now, he finished third in Hart Trophy voting in 2020, the first year he was a Ranger. I think the conversation is not necessarily just about Panarin. I think it's about what this means for the team if they make another long run. Because I was not alive for the 1980s, but the Rangers played the New York Islanders, I believe, 4 or 5 years in a row. And it was every single year that the Islanders won the Stanley Cup in their four-year dynasty. Herb Brooks was behind the bench for that. That core for the Rangers, when you look in retrospect, what did they not have to play against the Islanders? And it was almost the opposite. They didn't have the guys that could, they had players that could score, but they weren't doing it at the level and rate that Trottier, Bossy were. I know I sound like a complete nerd, but the point is, there's evidence in history of what Brian Boyle mentioned last night. And you think about why the 2014 team made it. They had those depth guys. They had the grit, and their top players played with it too. Stepan, Richards, St. Louis. They got into the corners. They mucked it up. You're seeing the teams that are going to the Stanley Cup. Florida now back-to-back years. Tampa with the depth players they had in Goodrow, in Coleman, in Mott, all those types of guys. Pat Maroon. Even on the defensive side of the puck. I think the concern at the bigger, like the more global scale for this team, if you zoom out, is not necessarily about the east-west passing, the failures to clear the puck, the forecheck. Those are all within the game. I think it's what comes next, because what do you do to solve that? And only one guy truly showed up, and that was Igor Shesterkin. He only allowed 1 goal on every 7 high danger chances. Just generational numbers between the 22 run and this year that he put up. And he came up empty-handed. It's a shame, because I think of everybody on this New York Rangers team, outside of him, Lafreniere, Trocheck, I think he is still that number one guy that showed up no matter what.
No matter what, I can't say that any better. And you saw it. You saw it after the game when Vinny T was consolidating him. You saw the frustration after the Tarasenko goal when it was 2-0, when Evan Rodriguez comes out and Igor comes out and gives him a push. If you know what I'm talking about, it was like 5 minutes left of the third in game 6. But you saw that was frustration right there. And you got to feel bad for him, because in a couple of those games, I'll give you the end of game 3, game 4. I mean, our defense had nothing. It was like we had no players on the ice, and they were just shooting it on Igor, and he was stepping up, and he was making save after save after save. And a few things I could say about Igor, not a lot of positive things to say. Just like I'm a little bit split on Mika, but there's a few things I'm not split on, and one of them is Igor. And Igor is so good with the stick, and Igor, you could see even when there's bodies in front, he still sees the puck so incredibly well, and that's part of the reason why he's able to make some of these incredible saves. And it's just unfortunate because you look at Hank. We love Hank. We grew up with Hank, but it was there's so many parallels, and Igor's still got a lot to go, but it's just we can't waste this, as a fan, ever since me and you going back to 8th grade, we've really seen we still haven't gotten anything up to that point, and it begs the question, what are we going to see moving forward? But again, Igor, fantastic. Another thing that I'm solidified is I thought Will Cooley, I think we'll transition to a little bit of positives. I know it's hard to point the positives out in such a dark spot, but I thought Will Cooley, Chives, had an amazing year. I thought for a first year of no expectations, I thought he had a great year and a great postseason, So what'd you think about Will Cooley?
Yeah, I thought, to be honest, I thought there'd be a little more production. And that's not a criticism. I just really thought he was built for the playoffs, and he's still so young. I thought Will Cooley was great. I think he performed as best as he could. Came up with a goal in a game, game 4 against Carolina. He has the mold, the build for a player that I think the Rangers need more of. He reminds me of, a Ryan Callahan, a Brandon Dubinsky in many respects. And I love his work in the corners. I thought he performed that way all year in the regular season. But again, it was, exacerbated really in the postseason. And he played to a T. I thought Cooley was very good for his role. I think if we're talking positives too, I think you can't ignore Miller and Lindgren playing okay. They played good. They didn't play great. I think those are two players that I've seen a lot of extreme takes on, like one way and the other way. But I think you have to commend that they're still, on the younger side, and they're a major part of the D-core. Their partners struggled in Fox and Trouba, and I thought they were pretty steady. Braden Schneider as well. And I think Schneider gets lumped into the Cooley situation or Cooley conversation with Alexis Lafreniere. I mean, Steve, I think if you told anybody he would be the one forward that was going to be the best performer in round 2 and the Eastern Conference Final last August, I think everyone would say you're shitting me. And Lafreniere blossomed in front of our eyes. So I think that's, if you're looking at this, you say you build around him, man, because he's 22 and he went off.
Yeah, I think he's our whole future moving forward in years to come. I mean, what I've seen from him and what makes me excited, and I said it a couple episodes ago, was when we came into the season, our priorities were Kakko, Hedel, and Lafreniere taking the next step. That was one of the big priorities. The second big priority, unfortunately, didn't pan out. It was getting Mika and Panarin to get going and get them sustainable. And the thing that didn't work out. I don't want to deviate from Lafreniere here, but when you think about it, Chives, we had more than 8 players at a certain point in the season play on that first line with Mika, and Mika didn't get going. Again, I'm not trying to shit on Mika, but I'm trying to bring all these facts out there, or these stats out there, to solidify that Mika did not play well. But back to Laf. Laf, again, he was the one play. He was what Kakko wasn't. That's what we all wanted him to be. And Lafreniere stepped up and took that next step. And again, I don't discredit it. Like, I'm not saying that he only had that performance because he was on a line with Panarin and Vinny T, because I don't think that's true. We've seen him make plays. That goal.
He wasn't like, I don't think I've seen that conversation out there. Like, what's he going to be without them? He was not a merchant. You go watch the tape, Lafreniere made a lot of those goals that he scored. Like, he created the play. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and he also let's be honest. He created a lot of those plays that Panarin scored on in the regular season. That wasn't all Panarin, so I think
Even in the
he
playoffs.
exactly. Yeah, look at the goal he scored in Game 3. The amazing goal, the second goal that he scored on Bob. So again, take a look at that. I think all in all, it was a great year. I think there's no questions in my mind moving forward with Loft. Now, the next player that I want to move on to, Kako Capo. When I was at the game, Chavs, I was in the building for Game 5. The one player that the Ranger fans were shitting on the most, and again, I don't think he had anything to do with the loss in Game 5. The fans hate Capo Kako. They want him gone, which I disagree with, but your take on Kako.
Yeah, here's my take, and it goes along with what I said with the depth conversation. And like what you just said, I understand. I think the consensus that I talked about all year in last postseason when last offseason when he signed is that he's no longer the second overall pick that was touted as a potentially elite offensive goal scoring player. Is that him anymore? No. And there's always going to be the comparisons to that draft class, which, by the way, he's still sixth in point scoring with that draft class. I know that's not what we thought he could be, especially in the conversation where it was, he could be the number one. Throw that out. It's in the rear view. Look at right now. I think his play along the boards, his possession, what he does as a depth player is still valuable. And if you can sign him, he's an unrestricted free agent. Why not keep him? First of all, Chris Drury, based on what he said at the trade deadline and the fact that he didn't trade him at the trade deadline, I think says a lot. I don't know the conversations that were had. Don't know the conversations he had with Laviolette. I know he was a scratch at some points in the postseason. But at the end of the day, I think his play on the ice is a good third line checking forward. And I really don't think by moving him, you then bring in another player of similar stature. Like, why not just keep the guy you drafted, keep it in-house, see how he continues to develop? He's not Lafreniere. And I know you made that comparison, right? Like, where Loft took that step. He's a first overall player now at just 22. And Kako is 23. But why not just bridge it again? And I know it's like, when is that over? But the Rangers did that with Chris Kreider, Matt Zuccarello, and Kevin Hayes, and it worked out on all three players where it was like, okay, when are we going to sign them to that major contract? For Hayes, he chose to sign with Philly because he didn't want to go through the rebuild with the team, and they traded him. They traded him to the Jets, and he went to Philly. Zuccarello was bridged twice, and Chris Kreider was bridged. I believe it was like a maybe like 2-year than a 4-year where it was like less cap. And then he signed his big deal in 2020. So I think at the end of the day, there was a lot of criticism on Wennberg, Kako, Goodrow, Hedel, Rosovic. Rosovic, again, I believe deserved that. At points, Will Cooley too in some respects in terms of production. I don't think you can really look at this postseason and really look at them. To me, depth scoring is a plus. And I think if you look at it in that respect with Kako, he played well. If you look at it in the respect, he's a second overall pick, then you're going to be disappointed. And I think, it's how you view it. Glass half full, glass half empty. Steve, what do you think about those depth guys and specifically with Kako?
I agree with you. I'm on the side where I believe that we should not give up on Kako. When October comes, and we're ready to drop the puck next season, he's going to be 23 years old. He's still going to be 23 years old. So are we really going to give up on somebody that's 23 years old? He's 10 years younger than Artemi Panarin. So up to this point, I really don't think, let's give him another 2-year contract. Maybe when he's 25, 26, then I'm ready to say we'll give up on him. We're done with Kako now. But I still think that he's still young. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's 23 years old. I think you nailed it out. I think it's hard to find a depth player like that in today's league. Let's say, okay, a lot of fans want Kako out. And trust me, they hate him. I can't get my head wrapped around it. But let's say we get rid of him, like you said. we're going to bring another player in, another Wheeler-esque type player. And let's say that doesn't work and you move on from him. Now you're out of Kako, a young
Now
player.
what, Steve-O, here's a comparison. Very different, but I hear what you're saying where it's like, what happened with Buchnevich? The Rangers still don't have a winger for Zibanejad and Kreider. You moved Buchnevich, and that's the position you gambled with. It's not working out. So I think that's a comparison. Two different players, but the same move. Where like, listen, you give up on a guy that's younger and you move him. Well, it might not work, and you might be cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same boat where a couple of the other players we moved on from went to other teams, and it didn't really pan out for them. But again, I think Kako's different, and I think he adds that depth. I mean, Kako's not a major piece of this lineup, but I think in the regular season and the postseason, you look at your recipe, you say you have your guys, and putting aside Panarin and Mika's problem and your stars not performing, it's all about depth. And I think Kako, like you said, I clip your part because I think you said it best, and all Ranger fans need to hear it. Kako is the perfect player for your depth. And I think we should not give up on him. He's a player like him. You're not going to miss him until he's gone. And every player is different. I can't speak to how Kako is to this. But remember, he had that big injury early on in the regular season. Maybe that injury coming back, he just wasn't the same. And we need to see him take that step next year. I'm not 100% sure. I can't say that. But again, Hedl, injury as well. I think he's come back in the playoffs, but he's going to have to take the next step. Hedl's going to be on this team for a while. Kako, I think, should remain as well. I mean, I'm glad we agree upon that. And I'll be honest with you, Chaves, I'm not confident that they're going to keep Kako. I really don't think so. I think when you scratch him in 2 Eastern Conference final games in a span of 3 years, to me, that just jumps out in big red writing on the wall that you're expandable. We don't need you. And that's kind of what worries me. What do you think on that note?
No, I agree with you. And I think, but part of the problem is we discoursed a lot about Matt Rempe. We talked about Wenberg too at times about not finishing, and then he finally scored that overtime goal. And I think the flaw in these conversations listen, fans are dealing and coping in a lot of respects, and they want results. So obviously there's desperation. There's how far are you willing to go? What is the organization going to do hypothetically? And Kako's part of that conversation. I just don't think by moving him or not moving him, that moves the needle for this team. You need the best out of your best players. And the reason I understand, Mike actually brought it up to me after we watched the game, the concern about the whole Maple Leafs conversation, like the Rangers have the goalie, and I think they're a better team than the Leafs because they wouldn't beat Carolina twice. They wouldn't be in the Eastern Conference final winning games if they were not producing like the Leafs players, like Mitch Marner, who's been heavily criticized, Austin Matthews, William Nylander, name it, the 7 goalies they've had in the last 5 years. But, you don't want to see this team get to the conference final again next year and lose again in the way they did. The same exact way, because they lost in many respects the same exact way that they did in 22. And I already outlined why that feels different. But I think, the conversation around Kako is like, I agree. I definitely think right now it's 50-50, if not 60-40, because like you said, they telegraph, like, if you're not going to play him, then, you're saying, I think in some respects, we don't need you, like you said. But the other part of that, too, is if Chris Drury's on the phone, how much value is he really bringing back? Because are you going to trade him for a second rounder?
It's a good point. It's a very good point.
What's he really fetching that's going to improve the team? Because if this team's supposed to be a Stanley Cup champion team, well, it's kind of how I felt with moving Buchnevich. Like, well, you move Buch, and now you don't know who to replace him with.
Exactly, and I still think, in some sense, that we're still kind of reeling a little bit from that Booch move. It just hasn't panned out. We were able to find some short-term solutions, but by the time when the games that we really needed to win, 2022 Eastern Conference Finals, 2024 Eastern Conference Finals, those short-term solutions were not sustainable. And again, it's the same point that we made with this depth. It just didn't work. Now
Well, and let me say too, they also committed money to Kako and Lafreniere over Frank Vetrano and Vladimir Tarasenko and Rangers curse. Not only the Steve-O curse happened in this game with the 1 minute left in the first period, the Ranger curse of a former New York Ranger scoring that goal against us. To me, though, the organization committed to Kako, to Miller, to Hedel, to Lafreniere, and that's why they couldn't sign Tarasenko. It's why they couldn't sign Frank Vetrano. I don't think you can peel that back now because Roslovic, the missed empty netter, goes up there in the history with Rick Nash and Ryan Strome's misses. And I think he's gone. Like,
no doubt about that.
Right? Like the Buchnevich move now is like, it's still, well, yeah, those short-term solutions worked, and then you didn't sign them. Like Frank Vetrano worked perfectly with Kreider and Zibanejad. You didn't sign him because you committed to the younger guys. So I don't think you can now not commit to the younger guys. I don't think I'm not saying that based on principle, but I just don't think now moving forward, Kreider takes it. He's 34, going to be 34. Zibanejad's a year older. Panarin's a year older and getting close to the end of his contract. So now we're going to move the younger guys. And like, I just don't, again, I think that's part of the ambiguity of Panarin not playing well against those teams. Zibanejad not performing when it's the conference final is like, well, what's the goal now? Because under Gallant, it was, well, the line changes and the in-game adjustments. And at the end of the day, it was the same result. They just didn't show up in the conference final. And that all comes back to the smaller pieces of like, you didn't sign Vetrano, then you didn't sign Tarasenko. I mean, now we're going to move Kako for a third rounder. Like, how does that improve the team?
You're right. And I agree with you 100%. They cannot do that. They have to stick to what the current plan of sticking with these younger players. Because again, if you alter from that path and you want to go back to something that you previously dismissed, that just shows that we either A, indecisive, or B, we don't know what the hell we're doing. So I agree with you 100%. And I want to focus on a few things here. Roslovic, we could go back to these trade deadline acquisitions. Roslovic's been horrible, man. I mean, there was maybe a few games where he looked well, but those looks were deceiving. Roslovic has been horrible. He was a weak trade acquisition pickup. I mean, the playoffs, he was horrible. I know he started off very good in that Washington series, and we were over here licking our lips. Oh boy, here's Frankie Vetrano all over again. No, Roslovic was horrible. And also, Wenberg did not play. That game 3 OT goal in the Eastern Conference Finals was misleading as well. I don't think Wenberg played well at all. I actually think he looked good with Mika and Kreider on the first line in Game 6, but that might have been that Mika and Kreider looked that bad. They just made him look good.
I thought Wemby, I thought he had a good conference final. Like, I think in Game 4, he blocked 10 shots. Like, I thought, you know what, Steve, I don't think Roslovic was horrible, but I also think those two guys weren't, I don't think the intent, like, I think they were supposed to be subtle. And that goes back to why the core is, like, why there's so much criticism there. Because, like, I don't think Wenberg and Roslovic were supposed to be, like super impactful. Like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that was the fundamental.
I think they could have played better.
Exactly, but again, it goes back to that Booch problem. When you have a big glaring issue on that first line, we try to move guys into that first spot, that winger spot on the first line. It just, none of that was sustainable. Not Wenberg, not Roslovic. And again, moving to the offseason, I'm circling that position right there because that is something we need to address, and we need something that is sustainable, Chives. I mean, that is probably our biggest move as we move into the off season. But I want to ask you, this is the $1 million question. Was this year in your eyes, and you covered this team for a majority of the season, was this season a success or a failure in your eyes? $1 million question coming up here.
I think in 3 weeks from now, you look and you say the regular season was a massive success. Like, they won the President's Trophy. They were the best team in the NHL. And I think they prove that they are a top team, like regular season team. We've never seen a sweep in our lifetime. They sweep the first round. Granted, we could say not a great team, but they still swept them. You have to be a good team to sweep. Second round, they beat Carolina again, and they went up 3-0. I think it was a good season. I think what gets tacked onto it now is 31 years since the last Stanley Cup. 5 conference finals appearances, and out of all of them, they made the Stanley Cup once, 2014, and a decade since the last time they made the Stanley Cup. So I think it was a good season. But I think at this point, with this core and this group, with the culture they've established since now 2019, at the end of next year, it will be the 2025 playoffs. Panarin signed in 2019. Trouba was traded and signed in 2019. Kakko was picked in 2019. That will now be 5 years of this core. I think, and really it'll be 4 years of the core being competitive. I don't think the window is going to be open that much longer unless you create inventive ways to keep it open, right? And Lafreniere's performing well has helped that. But I think if you view it from, you take a step back and you look at the timeline of the team's history and even recent history, I think it's a success. But what is your measure of success, right? Like, I think that's anyone's terms, and I'm going to look at the positives and take away that they were very good. But I think at this point in time, championship is what's desired. And in that respect, they failed.
100%.
But Steve, what's your measure of success, right? Like, again, I feel like that is subjective. And I know, obviously, as a reporter, I reported on the team. But also, I feel like that doesn't make my view of it any more credible than really anyone else's, right?
Yeah, and listen, we don't deviate and I think you made a great point. It's all about how you measure success or how every person measures it individually. And we don't deviate too far in how we measure it. We had a great regular season. We had an outstanding regular season. I don't forget about great. I mean,
it was the best all time for this club. Like, this club has been around for almost 100 years. This was their winning record.
Exactly. You swept round one. The way you ended round two, up to that point, it was all a success. But the reason, and again, I want to focus mainly on the positives. And I'm sure maybe in like another month from now, I might switch it back to success. But I'm going to switch it over to failure because I agree with your point on you saw 2022. After 2022, we were prepared to take that next step. Because a lot of us after 2022, yeah, your immediate reaction is disappointment, but it's like our future is bright. We're the top dogs and we're here. Last year, I cannot emphasize how much last year was such an organizational setback. Last year in 2023. And that was just a disaster blowing that lead to the Devils. And again, the Devils weren't even that good. Look at the year they had this year. Look at what happened in the Carolina series. They were quick work, 1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm.
This year, yes, we had an outstanding year. But again, you talk about windows. Igor is playing out of his mind. And you look back again. This is a horrible comparison. But again, you have to look at it. You look at Hank. When the last 4 years of Hank's career, he wasn't the same player. And again, it's sad to see one of the greatest Rangers of my childhood, probably the greatest, and he just wasn't the same towards the end of his career. And that's what I'm afraid about with Igor. That's why I agree with you. These next 2 years, 2025 and 2026. To me, ultimately, I'm not a prediction future. I can't see the future, but that's your window right there. Because again, you have a lot of guys that are getting older. Kakko's getting older if they decide to keep him. Loff is finally stepping into that role. We have Vinny T, and again, Igor's playing out of his mind. And Igor's only getting older. He's not that young. I'm not sure a specific age, but when I remember looking at it, I saw it a couple weeks ago. But I was like, wow, Igor is not that not as young as I thought he was. But
Hmm.
to me, there's your window. And yes, it was a success. But again, the way we went out, and I really just think we just met our match. I really do think, Chives, that the Florida Panthers were the one team that dismantled us because the way they played was the one way that we couldn't match. And I think we play any other team in the Eastern Conference Finals, we're the Eastern Conference Final champions. I really do think that. And the one team that got in our way was Florida, and we knew they were a good team, and they won. So I
I,
mean,
I
go ahead.
think part of what you said too is if you look at the top goal scorers and point scorers when the Rangers went to the conference final in 2012, 2014, and 2015 was Derek Stepan's your leading goal point scorer with 44 points. Rick Nash is your top point scorer with 69 points. And I believe it was Brad Richards or Marion Gaborik in 2012 with 72 and like 69 points. And the reason I say that is because this offense is far better. So I think it does feel like more of a failure because when you look at those numbers and you look at the way they played in the regular season, you look at those numbers and you say, oh my gosh, like our offense, we would dream of having in front of Henrik Lundqvist. And the shame is they just dried up when it mattered most. And you think about, again, those crucial games. You got a shorthanded goal to Kreider, Panarin last second type of goal that didn't matter, garbage time, Laffa garbage time goal. They got shut out again in game 5 and 7 against New Jersey. And I do agree. That felt like a step back. It felt like they took a massive step forward, an unprecedented step forward. And now they've taken a step back. And this year really felt like a year that if you have that much success, you hope you finish the season as the champion because now, again, the future, you don't know what's going to happen. So I think, like we talked about, success and failure, all in your own mind. But I do agree with you in the respect that, like, when you think about that Lundqvist era, you think about, like, how many more shots do you have? And I think with Lundqvist, you really looked at a team that didn't have the goal scorers this team has. So that's why I do feel like it feels like more of a failure.
Yeah, and that's why I said it feels more like a failure because when you compare it, it just doesn't equivalate. And I'm not even talking about winning a Stanley Cup. I think going to the Stanley Cup and being the Eastern Conference Finals in its own right, to me, is like winning the Stanley Cup in a sense. Because again, the last few years we could round off. Forget about the last few years. We'll go back to 7th grade when we were in 7th grade. We've seen a lot, and you went through it a couple episodes ago. All the devastating moments. We've been through a lot of failure, and it just begs the question: what do we have to do to get this team in order to win? And it's sad because we're not there yet. And I think my last point hinges on what you just said, that the Rangers, and this is something that they're gonna have to figure out. Having the issue of not performing is the worst possible issue you could have on
Oh
your
yeah.
team. It's the
Yeah.
worst possible issue because there's no solution to solve it. Like some teams, you go, you know what? We were good, but our defense was the issue. We had no defense. You address the defense. Sometimes it's the goaltending. We saw with the Devils last year. We're a good team. We just didn't have the goaltending. You fix the goaltending, you're a better team. Or to me, there was no one glaring piece. And yeah, you can look at the first line on the wing, but to me, we have the core: Mika, Kreider, Panarin, Fox, Trocheck, and Igor. That's one of the best cores in the National Hockey League. There's no debating about that. There's teams that have had more success with less of a core, and they've had more success. The problem is the Rangers have a problem. It's now 3 years in a row of players not showing up, Chives. And to me, that is the worst possible problem an organization can have in today's game.
Yeah. You know what? Put that on blast because Loft to me has the makeup where like he got physical. And that's what Sam Bennett has. That's what Makachuk has. And then you know what? I'm actually disappointed because now everyone's hopping on the whole Makachuk. Wow, look at the way he plays the game. You and I talked about how we thought they won that trade the second it happened because I saw that in him. And too many people with analytics are, oh, he can pass the puck like anybody. That does not win you a championship. And they want it to be that way, and it's never going to happen. Sam Bennett, Ryan Hart, those players, Zach Hyman, they're all the players that are going to get you there. It's not going to be, what the Leafs look like right now. Mitch Marner is not bringing you the Stanley Cup alone. And I know they made the changes. They brought in Max Domi, Tyler Bertuzzi. But at the end of the day, I really do believe the physicality of the game is never going to go away. You can try all you want. But when push comes to shove, and it did, the Rangers lost on that. At the end of the day, Lafreniere showed that, and I think the problem is the makeup of this team. Last year, it was the criticism of speed, and they fixed that by the puck. The puck moves faster than the man. I don't think the Rangers have fast players like a Michael Grabner, like we've seen in years past, Carl Hagelin, but they created it. Laviolette implemented a system that allowed them to move fast. The problem with X's and O's versus DNA is you can never fix DNA. And I talked with Greg Wyshynski about it in the preseason at the Garden. He talked about how he still didn't believe the Rangers had this speed game, and that'll be something that has to change. They changed that with the X's and O's. They succeeded. They found a way to be as fast as Carolina. They do not have the DNA to play Florida. They did not. Mika Zibanejad is never going to throw a heavy check. He's never going to dig in the corners like they expected on the boards at the end of that game. Artemi Panarin went right back into bad habits because that's not his game. Really, if you think about the players that stood out, it's part of their game. Vincent Trocheck, Chris Kreider, again, Lafreniere. I think in some respects, Ryan Lindgren, Barclay Goodrow. Every player we named that were played well had that in their game. I think for Jacob Trouba, the shame was getting the puck out killed him, right? Like playing against the forecheck. And that didn't allow him to play physically. But I think that's the macro concern with the team moving, now moving into the offseason. Season's over. It's done. Whether it was a success or failure, who you want to keep, who you want to trade, who you want to buy out. At the end of the day, I think for the most part, this is most of the team that's going to return. And the concern is, how much did they want it? I think they did want it, but how much did they want it at the end of the day? Because it's another year where they don't come away with the Stanley Cup. And I think they're touted as contenders, and that's a compliment. But, I think for an episode that I thought I was going to be at a loss of words, we talked for a long time here, Steve-O.
Yeah, that was not too shabby to end it off. I do have to ask you very quickly before we wrap up. The Stanley Cup final. I know that I will probably not. There's a 95% chance that I will not be tuning into that. But who do you want to take it all this year?
You know what? I know it sounds spiteful. I've hated on the Oilers all year. And I know we're recording this as the Western Conference Finals going on. So I can't really say, I would hope the Stars out of the West, to be honest. The last few years have just been the furthest thing from classic. I thought Avs Tampa was all right. Avalanche won. I was with that. If the Rangers were going to go out in 22. Last year, Panthers Vegas. This year, Panthers and one of the two remaining teams. Just no classic team, no original six, no expansion six, no end of a drought. I'm going to say nobody. I'm not in anyone's corner, and I'll be keeping up, but I think after the way this Rangers season ended and everything with my own personal stuff, like I just think it's time to kick back and take a break even from the from the pod for a little bit until draft time and we get into the summer.
100% agree. And that'll wrap up the season. Now that the season is over, like Chive said, Puck Talk will be taking a break until about July. We all need a break after this ending. Not how we wanted to go out, but it sucks. It sucks. It's demoralizing. It's depressing. And I'm sure every Ranger fan feels that way. But again, hockey is slow. The offseason really isn't anything. It's not like other sports where it's a little bit more fast moving. So, with that being said, if something big comes out within the next month, we will break it down. But I don't anticipate the Rangers making anything big in the next month. But thank you, everyone, for listening throughout the course of the season. Chives and I really appreciate that. And always remember, in times like this, it's just the luck of the puck.